week 14 already of the fantasy football season, and he has running back start-sits every matchup. This week, the first one, Thursday Night Football, the Las Vegas Raiders at the Los Angeles Rams. So right here, Josh Jacobs has been one of the better running backs this season in fantasy football. I know he's banged up with a calf injury, but obviously if he plays, he's a top 5 option each and every week, and he's a start. Now to the Rams side of things, Cam Akers, he's a sit for me. I know last week he had 60 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, but this week here, I don't think it's that tight of a game. I think the Raiders could get off to a good start. And last week, the adrenaline was flowing a little bit for this Ram team, even though obviously they fell down short in that ball game towards the end versus Seattle and lost. But Cam Akers, I don't think he's going to do it again. That was one of the best games of his career, and I'm going to sit him. And Kyren Williams, he barely saw the field last week, and I know he was a guy that a lot of people had high hopes for, especially in games where they're going to be trailing. But after what we saw over the last couple weeks here with Williams, he's a guy I would sit as well. Now to the Houston Texans at the Dallas Cowboys. So Dameon Pierce, the last 3-4 weeks here, the numbers have gone down, and it's not totally his fault. The Texans, they've gone down early, 20 plus points in the last couple games here, where they gotta just abandon the run and pass the football pretty much each and every play. So this week here, more of the same I expect in a battle of Texas over here, even though I think the Cowboys are going to run away with this game early and often, where once again it's going to be a bad game script for Dameon Pierce. So this week is a number 2 option possibly, or flex, but I have him as a borderline versus a tough defense, and just with the way this Texan team's been getting blown out over the last few weeks. Now to the Cowboys side of things, pretty straightforward. Ezekiel Elliott and Pollard, a great 1-2 combo this season, with Elliott getting his own drives and obviously the goal line work for the most part, and Tony Pollard being that explosive and breakaway type of running back out of the backfield. So right here, these guys are 2 great options this week, especially versus a weak Texan team. And Elliott and Pollard, the easy starts. Now to the Ravens at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Gus Edwards, it hasn't been that good over the last couple weeks, but the matchup's pretty decent here, where we know you can run on this Pittsburgh Steelers team for the most part. So Edwards I have as a borderline option. I'm not going to be 100% confident though in saying I'm going to start Edwards, especially in a win-or-go-home type of situation for some fantasy owners where they're on the brink of making the playoffs or not, with the playoffs starting next week here in week 14, because I know I'm in a couple of those situations. If I don't win, I'm not going to make it this week. So right here, to trust a guy like Gus Edwards in that situation is a little dicey. So he's borderline, and J.K. Dobbins might return in this ball game as well. And we don't know his workload. We don't know what he's going to be doing in this one. And with Lamar Jackson out, I think they will run the ball a little bit more, or try to win this game. But still, they're both borderline options for me. And Kenyon Drake, the last couple weeks, has been a non-factor for this Raven team. So he's an easy sit. And now to the Steelers side of things, Najee Harris. I know he's been a bust at where he was drafted in the first round, but in terms of at least putting up numbers and being decent, he's been a number 2 running back the whole season, and he's at least good minimum for 10 to 12 fantasy points. So this week here, in a ball game where the Steelers still want to play hard and play spoiler for this Raven team, I think Najee Harris could have a decent ball game, and he's a guy who's been playing through injury all season, and he's been grinding it out with decent ball games. So he's a start. Now to the Vikings at the Lions. This is a pretty good one. Dalvin Cook, he's had a good career versus the Detroit Lions. I know this season he's definitely taken a step back in terms of fantasy points and more of a pass-happy offense over there for the Vikings. But this week here, I think he rumbles with a great ball game at the Lions, and he's a starter. Now to the Lion running backs. This ball game, believe it or not, I think it's going to be a tight game between these division rivals. And the Lions offense is a great team at home in terms of putting up points and helping fantasy owners. DeAndre Swift last week, one of his better games in the last couple weeks here. He's still not 100% obviously with his injury, but he's a starting. Jamal Williams, if you're looking for 10 fantasy points, that's what he's getting at least each and every week. He's going to get a goal line stomper and about 30 or 40 yards, and I see more of the same here for Jamal Williams, leading the league for 14 rushing touchdowns. So he's a start this week as well in a good matchup. Next ball game, Jaguars at the Titans. Travis Etienne, he's becoming one of the better running backs already over the last few weeks, especially since they traded James Robinson away to the New York Jets. And the Jets aren't even using him now, especially with their starting running back, Breece Hall, out for the year. Michael Carter banged up, and they're still not using him. So Etienne, it was his time, and he's been putting up fantasy numbers. So this week here in a pretty tough matchup on paper versus the Titans, he's a start at running back. And Derrick Henry, the last couple weeks here, the numbers haven't been great with 14 fantasy points in week 12, and then last week with only 8.5 versus the Eagles. But this week at home, I think he rumbles, and he's had a great career versus Jacksonville Jaguar defense. So this week here in a big situation, I think Derrick Henry comes through and has a big ball game, 25 to 30 fantasy points, and he's a start this week now to the Philadelphia Eagles at the New York Giants. So right here, Miles Sanders, he's been a hit or miss type of running back this season for this Eagle team, but he's a guy you pretty much got to stick with as your number 2 running back or flex option, because he could pop off anytime. And that's the thing with this Eagle offense. We know they're a high-powered offense, but some weeks A.J. Brown gets his, some weeks it's Devonta Smith, and some weeks it's the running game. And Miles Sanders, the only guy who's going to be consistent week in and week out, obviously, with monster points, is Jalen Hurts. But the rest of these guys are capable any week of doing it. So this week here versus a mediocre Giant run defense, and that's how teams should attack them more and more as I've seen it throughout the year. I got Sanders as a start, and now Saquon Barkley. I know the numbers haven't been as elite as they were the first 2 months of the season, but he's still a running back that's a top 10 option at worst. Even though I still would rank him in this ball game as a top 5 option, is Barkley, and you start him each and every week, and you came this far to the season. Now to the Jets at the Bills here. I don't like any Jet running back, and we don't know how it's going to work out, especially if Michael Carter comes back off his ankle injury. So Michael Carter I have as a sit. Zonovan Knight, he's looked good over the last couple weeks here since he's been in the mix for the Jets. With both games double-digit fantasy points, but I got him as a sit as well. And Ty Johnson is a passing downs back. He's had 2 good weeks in a row as well. So this Jet backfield, they've been actually pretty relevant for fantasy football. But this week here with a tough matchup, and I don't know how the workload is going to be distributed, even though I think it's going to be Carter and Knight early down splitting and Johnson on passing and third down work here. It's still tough in this situation, and I think the Bills want revenge after losing to the Jets in Week 9. So I got to sit for all these guys this week. Now to the Bills side of things, Devin Singletary and Cook. For the most part, it was almost a split, but James Cook, believe it or not, got the majority of the work in the running game in that one, especially early in the game. So Cook last week with his best game of his NFL career had 16 carries and 16 fantasy points. And right now, it wouldn't be surprising to me if he starts taking over week after week as the number 1 running back over there, with Singletary being a guy that works in here and there and being a goal line guy. So this week here, both borderline options, because we know this Jet defense is good. I know Dalvin Cook and Madison had touchdowns last week for the Vikings, but this week here, I think they could buckle down a little bit with the Buffalo Bills. So I got both those guys borderline. Now to the Browns at the Bengals. Nick Chubb, one of the best running backs this season in fantasy football. I know the last couple weeks the numbers haven't been as high as they were early in the season, but right now Nick Chubb's a start for me. He's matchup proof, top 5 running back each and every week. And now to his backup, Kareem Hunt, he just hasn't had it this season. And I'm surprised this Brown team at the NFL trade deadline didn't trade Hunt and try to get a 4th or 5th round pick in next season's draft. But anyway, Kareem Hunt hasn't been doing it. He's been a bust for the most part, where a lot of people were hyping him up coming into the season like he would do what he did last season. But this year, he hasn't been the answer, and he's a sit. And out to the Bengals side of things, if Joe Mixon plays, obviously he's going to be a start. And Samaje Perine, the last couple weeks here, he's been a top running back in the top 10 in fantasy points at the position for starting. So he's one of the best backup running backs in the league. And to be honest, he's looked better than Mixon for the most part this season. I know Mixon had that one ball game with 5 touchdowns, but besides that, he's been a bust for the most part as well. But whoever starts this game and plays is a start for me in this one, because this Cincinnati backfield gets a lot of production, with teams obviously focusing on Jamar Chase and T. Higgins more. Now to the Chiefs at the Broncos. Isaiah Pacheco, the last couple weeks here, he's taken the running back position by the reins here, and he's had double-digit fantasy games the last 2 weeks, and the workload's been there as well. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's been out now the last couple weeks. It's Pacheco's job. This guy runs hard, and he tries to run you over each and every play is Pacheco, with that non-stop mentality of trying to get the extra yards. So this week here versus a Denver team that I know played well last week, but lost at the end 10-9 versus the Ravens. I got Pacheco as a start, and Jared McKinnon, it's like 1 week he has a great week, and then another week you're only going to get 3 or 4 fantasy points. So at best, I got McKinnon as a borderline option. Out to the Broncos with Latavius Murray. If you need 10 fantasy points, he's a guy that's going to do it for you. If you're happy, just with the 10, or you don't have a lot of guys and you need a guaranteed 10, Latavius Murray definitely would do that for fantasy owners. But this week in a matchup versus the Kansas City Chiefs, where I believe they're going to be chasing points early and often, and Murray at this point of his career doesn't do much in the passing game. I have him as a borderline option, but like I said, if you need 8 to 10 fantasy points, he'll guarantee it pretty much as Murray in PPR leagues. And now to Mike Boone, his backup. He came back last week, and we didn't see much out of him, so he's an easy sit this week until he sees more playing time and until we see him on the field. Now to the Bucs. At the 49ers, Rachaad White and Fournette both had pretty decent ball games in that crazy Monday Night Football comeback in 3 minutes down 16-3. Brady and the Bucs winning, including Rachaad White catching a game-winning touchdown at the goal line. So right here, Rachaad White's look well, especially in the passing game. 6 catches, 41 yards, and a touchdown in last week's ball game versus the Saints. And Leonard Fournette, he's still that physical running back. He's still a guy at the goal line I think they're going to give the ball to. I know this 49er defense is solid, but I believe these two guys can help fantasy owners, especially in a crucial week here in Week 14. And I know this Niner defense is decent, but I'm still going to roll the dice and start both these guys this week. Now to the Niners side of things, Christian McCaffrey, he's been a monster since he's joined the San Francisco 49ers. I know 2 monster games and 2 mediocre games, but he's still a guy I have confidence in, obviously, each and every week as a top 5 back minimum for fantasy owners. So this week here, even versus a pretty tough upfront unit here with the Tampa Bay Buck team, and a Buck team that I think is starting to find their own on the defensive side of things. I'm starting McCaffrey, and Jordan Mason now, he's taking the role of Elijah Mitchell, and last week he looked good, 9 carries, 51 yards in the Mitchell role here for Jordan Mason. But I'm still not going to go out there, especially in a big week, and start him. If he has another good game, then maybe he's a flex option in a playoff run for fantasy owners. But right now, I have him as a sit. Now to the Panthers. At the Seattle Seahawks, D'Onta Foreman, he's still banged up a little bit with a couple nagging injuries, but he said he's going to play in this game. And for the most part, D'Onta Foreman, he's been a viable option at the running back position, and a guy who's been helping fantasy owners with a couple ball games with 15 or more fantasy points. I know in this one in Seattle, it's going to be tough. We know Baker Mayfield, he got waived from this Carolina Panther team, and now it's Sam Darnold pretty much with P.J. Walker backing up. But anyway, D'Onta Foreman, I think, can find a few holes. The Seattle run defense ain't all that great. And we even saw last week Cam Akers with the best game of his career. So D'Onta Foreman, definitely a start. Chuba Hubbard, I know he had 17 carries, 65 yards in Week 11, but he's still not a guy I have confidence in. I got to see a little bit more out of him, and he's a sit. And he didn't even get any receptions or targets in the passing game as well. Now to the Seattle side of things, Kenneth Walker, he left the ball game early in Week 13 versus the Rams and didn't return with an injury. And even him and Geno Smith had an argument on the sidelines. But obviously, if he plays, this guy's a top 15 running back each and every week is Walker. If you don't play Tony Jones, looks like he's going to be the early downs back with DJ Dallas and Travis Homer filling in on passing down. So Tony Jones, he's definitely a top pickup this week on the wire, like I mentioned. Not many owners actually went out there and got him right away. But anyway, he's a guy I would start if Kenneth Walker's out in this ball game because they got no one else. Penny's out for the season, and it's Tony Jones, Dallas, and Homer, with, I believe, Tony Jones being in between the tackle guy. And now to DJ Dallas, who'll be the passing downs guy with Travis Homer, and he's a borderline option. I know this Panther defense ain't all that great, but if they get off to an early start here as the Seattle team, you know they're going to be running the ball a lot in the third, fourth quarter. Now to the Miami Dolphins at the Los Angeles Chargers. Jeff Wilson Jr. last week, it was a down game for him, no doubt about it, with the Miami Dolphins. But this week here in a better matchup at the Los Angeles Chargers, I think Jeff Wilson Jr. could get back to what he was doing the first few games with this Dolphin team. And this Dolphin team, they got off to the great start, obviously, to start the game with a 70-yard plus touchdown to Sherfield from Tua. But after that, the Niners bottled them up. But obviously, this Los Angeles Charger defense isn't anywhere close to that 49er defense. I think Jeff Wilson bounces back, and I have him as a start as the number 2 running back this week. His counterpart and backup running back, Raheem Mostert, he really hasn't done much over the last couple weeks here. I know last week he saw a little bit more of work, but that was because it was versus his former team as well. And Jeff Wilson Jr. wasn't doing much, but this week at best in a tough situation in Week 14, I got Mostert as a borderline option. Now to the Chargers, you're not going to say much. You took Austin Eckler in your first round of your fantasy draft. He's carried you this far this season, and he's a guy each and every week, 10 points is his floor, with 30, 35 being his ceiling, and he sees the start. And now to the final game, Night Football, New England Patriots at the Arizona Cardinals. So right here, this ball game, pretty much straightforward. Ramondre Stevenson, he's been one of the better running backs in fantasy football over the last month of the season. And he's a guy that catches a lot of passes out of the backfield. In the last couple of weeks, a lot of garbage time. Last drive into 7 or 8 fantasy points on the last drive of the ball game here has been Ramondre Stevenson. So this week here, I have him as a star once again. This Cardinal defense really hasn't stopped anyone this season. I think Stevenson this week, at least 15-20 fantasy points he will do. Now to Damian Harris, he's been banged up over the last few weeks. The numbers really haven't been there, and there should be no reason why the Patriot team shouldn't give Harris anywhere from only 5 to 8 carries at most with the way Stevenson's been playing. So in a Week 14 matchup here, I'm not trusting Harris and I'm sitting him. And James Conner, he's been solid over the last few weeks here since he returned from injury and now coming off a bye week. I think he could do some work versus a tough New England Patriot defense. We've seen some running backs have decent ball games over the last few weeks. Dalvin Cook a couple weeks ago, I know wasn't the greatest of games for him. But then last week, this Patriot team, they got destroyed and they gave up a decent amount of points on the ground here. So I think James Conner in a home game coming off the bye week could be decent this week. So that's running back starts, sits every matchup for Week 14 of the fantasy football season.